Well, it's time for Week in Review, and COVID is once again dominating the headlines, starting with Joe Rogan, host of the most listened to podcast on Spotify, being accused of being a public health menace for repeatedly promoting falsehoods about COVID-19 on his show. That's according to more than 260 doctors, nurses, and scientists. Now, earlier this week, the group of healthcare professionals wrote an open letter to Spotify calling on the streaming platform to implement a misinformation policy, specifically citing the Joe Rogan Experience and its concerning history of broadcasting misinformation, particularly regarding COVID-19 pandemic. So far, Spotify has declined to respond. And this past Tuesday, the Legault government said it will table a bill on a tax for unvaccinated and has vowed to let it be open for debate in the Quebec legislature. Now, many are calling the controversial bill unfair, while others are in full support. Now, we're going to start there for our Week in Review. Joining me today are Neil Headley, host of the Snooze Button podcast, and Jamar McNeil from Chum 104.5. Gentlemen, good to see your faces this morning. How you doing?
Good to see you.
All right, so I am so excited to get your opinion because both of you are radio guys. You're also in the podcast space. So, podcaster Joe Rogan, he's a big deal in the podcast space. He has been accused of spreading vaccine misinformation on his show. I want to get your thoughts on this petition from healthcare professionals. Neil, I'll start with you.
So I'm in the podcast space in that I make podcasts not only of my own, but I help other people too. Everybody from like nobodies to massive Canadian corporations. I help them with their podcasts too. And a bunch of them come to me and they say things like, we want to have a show that's as big as Joe Rogan's. Here's the problem with that. It's kind of like in radio, people will say, I want to be a great morning show guy like Jamar McNeil is, who, let's say this out, so
he's
Joe
kind of
Rogan,
a big deal, that Jamar McNeil.
Number one podcast in the world is Joe Rogan, but the number one radio morning show in Canada, Jamar McNeil. So let's just get that out of the way for a second. But here's the thing about Joe Rogan is Joe Rogan, much like let's pick a major fast food drive-through. Joe Rogan, and this is from the inside on the podcast industry side, Joe Rogan makes really tasty garbage like so many of the fast food chains do. It's stuff that's not good for you, but people consume it en masse. I think, and Spotify's under fire for a whole pile of other stuff too. Like they've been accused of making these big, bold announcements about their podcasting simply to boost the share price. Like, let's talk about the exclusive announcement about the Harry and Meghan podcast a couple of years ago, where there was one teaser episode and then nothing, but the stock price went up by tens of millions of dollars. Where's that Barack and Michelle Obama podcast that Spotify was supposed to have? It's nowhere. Why? Because Spotify is doing interesting things with their content to make sure that share price stays high. Okay, so it's interesting that you say that because according to the Wall Street Journal, the Joe Rogan Experience podcast is worth more than $100 million. So Jamar, I'm sending this question to you. What is the likelihood of Spotify implementing this misinformation policy?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words earlier. I appreciate it. And this guy actually does consume garbage every now and then, like a little burger and some fries here and there. I actually listen to Joe Rogan's podcast, even though it's not healthy. I listen to it, and I know a lot of people listen to it, and I know it's so popular. The likelihood that they'll do something, I don't think very likely, but they need to. They need to because, unfortunately, because COVID has been so politicized, it's been allowed to have all this misinformation around it. If this was like the AIDS crisis, you could not possibly go on the air and spread misinformation. If this was cancer, tuberculosis, any other crisis that didn't have politics around it, you couldn't do it because it would be false, it'd be offensive, and it would be dangerous. But COVID got politicized, and now you can say all these really wild things about it, and people will actually believe it and defend it. And it's crazy because people are dying and getting sick around it. It's unbelievable.
I just want to ask you, because as a listener, as an avid listener to Joe Rogan's podcast, do you hear that because I don't listen, I'll be honest. I know about his podcast. I've heard from a lot of people who do listen to it. But you listen to it. Do you hear a lot of COVID misinformation when you listen?
It's a lot of debates. Like they'll have these debates around, the ivermectin and I've got the T cells and I've got immunity, and it's all these debates, and it's like a lot of it's just not the facts from real. They'll have doctors who are coming on and trying to have compete. Even Sanjay Gupta was on there the other day competing with Joe Rogan. It's a lot of debates, but some of the information just should not be allowed to be spread on such a wide scale because it's a public health crisis.
But here's where Spotify comes in particular, because if you were to put a show out there with misinformation on, for example, Apple Podcasts, well, Apple Podcasts will pull your show. Spotify is kind of a Wild West, and really, so is all of podcasting. Like, if Jamar McNeil went on the air and on the radio and gave all kinds of misinformation, that's a problem.
It'd be a big problem because there's a big company that is holding me to account.
Yeah.
You understand?
But
so then why isn't Spotify holding...
It's a little bit of a Wild West.
Yeah, but why isn't Spotify, it's also a large company, why aren't they also holding the host of their podcast that's on their platform to the same measure that we're all held to?
The podcast
it's the same problem that... Yeah, well, and it's also that, and Jamar knows this very well as well. Howard Stern. Look at all the things Howard Stern did on his radio show that he got away with. Why? Because Howard Stern made a lot of money for his parent corporation. And so, it's a lot easier to get away with stuff when the cash register is ringing.
So this is what it comes down to. If you make money, you can get away and do whatever you'd like. Okay, well, sadly, we ran out of time to talk about our other topic because we were so passionate about Joe Rogan. But don't worry, we'll do this again next Saturday. I want to thank my guests, Neil Headley and Jamar McNeil. Thanks again, guys.
Thanks both.